All right, and it's to you, Christy.
Great. So today we're going to be looking at a couple of things. So we're going to just look at some of the questions that you had about actually motivation, but as it relates to multiple opportunities. We'll look at some of our homework readings, and then we will begin to talk about how to get some institutional change going, from baby steps to big steps. So that's kind of our.
I just want to make real sure, like, did I put the right slides in here for today? Yep, we did. Okay, sorry about that, Christy.
That's okay. So yeah, and actually you can go to the next slide. It's okay. So you can see on our timeline here we are in May, shifting the grading paradigm. So how to begin to make some small steps in the school in the team that you work in the school that you work in the district that you work in. Just what are some ways that you can start to grow a critical mass of people who are interested in making some change. And then later today, we'll talk about what happens in June. All right. Okay, so we're looking at every time after our webinar, we look at the feedback that you left us on the Google form, and I pull some questions out of that just so we can look at those together. So always some great questions and great thinking in there. Andrew's going to debrief some of the homework reading, and then we'll talk about shifting the paradigm, and we'll have some time in our breakout room to brainstorm together. I've been really impressed with this group and just how respectful you guys are about using the norms. Just there really hasn't been any issues that I'm aware of people not feeling heard or valued, or at least no one's brought it to our attention. And so I'm just thrilled that you guys are so cognizant of the norms and just really willing and open to hearing other perspectives and thoughts on that. It just makes for such a rich conversation. So thank you all for paying attention and valuing that part. All right, so here's our first question that I pulled off of the Google form. How do you set up your gradebook with proficiency grading and the learning targets when there are multiple learning objectives for a unit? So you could have in one unit, so sometimes a unit of study, as you know, is like a chapter in the textbook, or it's related to a learning target. I know in our district, our learning targets tend to be written as a unit, but you could also have a unit that encompasses several learning targets. So when I am creating assignment that that can be evaluated for several learning targets, I evaluate it. So let's say I have an assignment and I'm going to attach it to a content target, but then also an inquiry target. Let's say there's an inquiry component to it. So I evaluate it for the inquiry piece, and I assign a grade for the inquiry target and put it in my gradebook. And then I evaluate it for content knowledge, and I assign a grade or a score, and then I enter that into the grade book. So I'm actually entering 2 grades for the same assignment. They're just connected to different learning targets. You could have an assignment that's linked to 5 targets. I mean, we often see that in language arts, right? So if a student writes an essay, we're going to evaluate them for author's craft, transitions, word choice. I'm just making this up because I'm not a language arts teacher, but right, there's multiple things that you could assess in one assignment. So it just depends on the nature of the assignment.
And what I find in my classroom is that, like, if you do that, the first time they're like, wow, why do I have to regrade for this assignment? And then they're like, oh, I only have to redo this piece. I don't have to like figure all of it out. I can just break it down to the one piece I don't get, and then they appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there you go. So you can organize your gradebook with sub-targets, all linked to one priority standard or one big target. Let's see, how do you set up your gradebook with proficiency grading and the learning targets when there are multiple learning objectives for a unit. Okay, so you could link it to multiple targets, or I also read this as if there are multiple pieces of a learning target. So like in chemical reactions, we look at types of reactions, balancing reactions, predicting products, like there's multiple pieces that we look at. So we could do a quiz that evaluates these 3 of our 5 objectives in our learning target. So then I would have a grade just for those 3. You can set up your grade book that way. You might have a lab that does these 2 objectives. So then I would have a grade for these 2. And so what I'm saying here in blue is if you have multiple grades for the same objective, you could go with the highest one or the most recent one or the average of them, however you choose to do that. Multiple ways to do that. All right. How should multiple opportunities be graded and or assimilated into our understanding of a student's current learning? How should multiple opportunities be graded and or assimilated into our understanding of a student's current learning? My favorite way is using a rubric because I can go to that progression of learning that I've spent time writing out with my team. And as they do another multiple opportunity, I can reevaluate, have they moved up in the learning progression? So that's, I've already taken some time to put that together. So it's already written. I don't have to, rethink about what the learning progression is. I can just take my evidence and see where it applies on that learning progression. And then if there's multiple criteria, I can evaluate each of the criteria separately as a line item on the rubric. And using their best opportunity score is usually the recommendation, right? And that's the whole point. They're trying again to show you that they have learned and mastered the material. So let's give them the higher of the scores. Great. How strict can the parameters be for retakes if we want to encourage them not to retake that particular thing and rather do it on the next thing? I know what this person means. So I want to discourage taking retakes. And instead, I want to say, well, your next opportunity is coming up. So what I would say, it's kind of a flip answer, but it's kind of true at the same time. Just don't offer retakes. That's what I would do. I tried retakes and I'm not a fan just because it's a serious commitment, time, energy on the teacher's part. It's a lot. And I know that the content is going to be spiraling and we're going to have some more opportunities coming up. Now, if we have content that's not spiraling, my first question is that valuable content that we want to keep and teach? Because we'd like it to spiral, right? We'd like to come back to it and circle back to it and hit it again and again. So if we're not doing that, the wondering is that content valuable? But then I would say, I guess if it is valuable and we want to keep it, retake might be the only way to go if it's not spiraling and we're not seeing it later. Let's see, don't offer retakes or offer the option of 1 retake a semester. So you could do it that way too. You could say, here's our options for multiple opportunities. One of them is a retake and you get to do that 1 time a semester. Just to kind of push students out of that mindset of retake as the only way also. That's one idea. Otherwise, their next opportunity is going to be in the next unit or in the next assignment or next month or whatever it is. Just say, well, we'll catch you next time. Same if they miss an opportunity or they miss the deadline or they miss, we'll catch you next time. That's all right. You missed this one. We'll do it on the next one. So those are my thoughts.
I gotta unmute. All right, so we gave you 3 choices for readings for homeworks, and this is the reasons why we give them to you. So the first one was how teachers are changing grading practices with an eye on equity, and we called this the teacher perspective. And one of them, the goal for this was to kind of get an idea of how you can so that you can like figure out for you as a teacher, if you're just trying to change your own practice, what are you actually trying to do for yourself? So you start with mastery. You want to make some tweaks for these policies and things and ideas that we've done to make it work for you. And then you'll want to remember that there's going to be a dip in homework until the first test or quiz, and don't lose heart, right? Okay. As soon as they figure out and they make that connection, and the sooner that you can give them some grade, some quiz, some test, so that they can start making the connection, the sooner they'll start really getting back on the ball to do things. The second one we gave you was Grading for Equity 1, School's Approach to Increasing Student Ownership. And we called this the school paper, because if you're already like, I'm doing this, but I want to get my friends involved, the rest of my department, for example, what are some approaches you can do for that? I clicked on it and it gave me to the page instead of what I wanted to do. So let me get back to my full screen here. All right, so what I'm wanting to do is, if you want to make a difference in a school, you got to get a critical mass. You got to convince like your one department, and then once that one department is seeing changes, you can spread them to other departments. You'll need to get teachers together to resolve issues. This means the admin is going to have to give them like common release time, common prep time, or some extended hours after school, so that they can start talking to each other to keep that critical mass and troubleshoot together. You want your problems of practice to have to talk about, right? And those are like the two big starting points if you're trying to make a difference at a school. And if you're trying to convince your administrators to, like, for the district, to get the whole district on board, that's what this last paper was for. And so you got to make sure that students see a path to success, because if they don't see that path, they give up. And then finally, when it's done right, you want to make sure that the grades reflect understanding. So this is like what you want to tell your principal or a district leader, to say, hey, this is better for students, because that'll let students see a path to success. It'll let them sort of have the grades reflect understanding, as opposed to some other thing that we don't know what it means. So that's what the purpose of those 3 readings was for. All right. So, but how do we change our practice? How do we start this process? That's where we're at right now, and kind of what we're talking about today, because you're maybe you've drunk the Kool-Aid and you're ready to make it go. So the first thing we got to do is figure out what a grade in your class means. So sit down and take some time over the summer. Think about, between now and the next time, what do you want your students to be able to do when they leave? What skills do they need? What kind of understanding do they need? And how is this going to lead them to the next step? So if you teach physics, how is this going to lead them to chemistry? If you teach chemistry, how does it lead them to biology? If they're going to move on to college, how does it get them to college? If they're not going to go to college and they're going to a trade school, how can they use the skills and the understanding of, you know, engineering processes in when they're building a house or when they're thinking about electric? You know, how does it all fit together for folks? So that's the first thing. You got to make sure that you are clear on what you want them to do. The next thing you got to do is think about communicating with parents. And so part of that is like doing the gradebook change. So like, and that doesn't necessarily mean changing your gradebook software. It might mean looking to see if there's a standards-based grading setting in your software. It might mean bucketing. How do you want to bucket your work together in ways that make sense, so that you can have these multiple opportunities and have them all lead into one thing? Ways that you can look at excluding or replacing grades along the way in the existing software, or use a manual gradebook. I know that there are schools in our district that use Canvas or some other gradebook, and that allows them to do all the things that they want to do, and then they feed the final grade into like Synergy, which doesn't allow them to do what they want to do in the way that our district is paid for it. You might need to communicate with IT to do some of these changes.
Andrea, can I chime in here?
Yeah.
The first bullet, I would say proceed with caution, right? Sometimes I think admin and such can get a little fussy if you're hunting around in the software and clicking things and making changes. I know I would feel fussy if I had teachers clicking around and trying to figure out how they could put points in the grade book when we're a standards-based district, right? So I think you have to grow some critical mass for change. You look around and see if the functionality is there. Certainly IT would know if it's there or not. But before clicking and making adjustments, I would encourage you to build that critical mass and then approach your principal. You can certainly do standards-based grading in your classroom as an isolated person, right? Even if your team is not on board. And again, proceed with caution, right? Because some schools require that the team does all the same thing. And while you're, potentially growing that mindset, you can try it out and work out some of the kinks as you then the next year bring some other people along and say like, hey, I did it for a whole year. Here's the things I learned. Here's why I love it. Here's why I think it's great for kids. Here's some things I'm still working on. Join me this year and let's see if we can work out the bugs together. See what you think after we try it for a while.
And as a side note on that what you were talking about, proceed with caution, you're right. Even if you have the same grading software as, let's say, Beaverton, where they have it all turned on, districts have to pay extra money to get standards-based grading turned on. So it might not work quite right. So you do want to talk with IT if you're thinking about using the software. Otherwise, use a manual grade book, figure out ways to replace or exclude grades and tests along the way. Those are ways to do it, even if your grade book isn't set up with the right software. And the bucketing of work together, that's like when I assign grades and I say that these three things are all under one standard, that you can do that necessarily with in a standard grade book. You can sometimes do that. And if you can't get your grade book to work, do it manually and then fill it in and find some way to communicate student progress with parents outside of the grade book. Another piece of communicating what's going on with parents is you really need to figure out what these policies are, because a lot of the parents aren't necessarily really going to understand. So you could write letters to parents, emails to parents, talk about it at parent-teacher night. Here's an example letter if you want to look there. I'm going to click on it really quick so you can kind of see what that letter is that someone has put there. I'll go back to here. When you do that, you want to emphasize it's better for students, that it helps them learn how to learn, and that you're willing to listen to what their concerns are and their thoughts are. One of the schools in our district, they tell parents and they say, talk to your student about it. And they spend a lot of time educating students and have the students be the intermediary to their parents. But they do, that's what they put in their letter is, we're doing the standards-based grading thing, and this is sort of how it works, and ask your student to explain it to you. Which leads us sort of into back to report cards again, of when we're doing that communication, after we've sort of communicated that we're doing these changes, it's going to show up some way in that report cards. Like we talked about in software, it's going to show up in those intermediate grades. It's going to show up in report cards as well. If you don't have a good program, just enter the grades and then find comments that you can put in there for the behavior pieces. Most grading softwares allow you to either have standard comments or comments that you can add in. If you have the ability to type your own comments, maybe you make a set of comments that you can cut and paste for certain kinds of grades. And that way it's easier for you to add regular comments to grades. And make sure you get others on board with the progress. Like the more people that you get in your group, in your district, the more that you have to, go back and sort of talk about reworking report cards. And like I said earlier, get your students on board, because if your students are on board and can explain to their parents what the grades mean, then the parents will become on board too. So that starts with like maybe making a mock grade book to explain how this all fits together. You want to explain why you're doing this and what you're doing and why you're doing it to make sense to them. And what they have to do to improve their grade, because ultimately they want to, a lot of your students want to do well, right? They want to pass, maybe just to get out of your class, or they want to do well, right? And so how do they get there? And you'll need to be like, it's not about these points, it's about showing me these skills. And these are some different graphics that demonstrate it. And also each one of these pictures is a link to a different sort of site or video that talks about explaining how that works, right? So like this one, this graphic is like, hey, it's like figuring out what's going on with your car. You know, which part of it needs attention that needs to be fixed or needs some extra work, or which one of these targets needs some extra work. And this is a fun video. I don't know if we want to show it here right now, Christy. Sometimes those don't always work, but what do you think?
Well, I will say that when we were putting these slides together and Andrea put this video in and I watched it, how did I not know this video was out there? I love this video and I really want my district to create something like this because I think it's a fantastic way of explaining standards-based. Maybe we can watch a little bit of it just as get a taste of it.
Right. Do I have it set up so that I can make it the sound work? Can you hear the sound? All right, hang on. Let me see if I may have to stop sharing and then reshare.
Or just open it in a window, in a website window.
When you hit share screen, there's a little extra box that you click that says share sound.
Yeah, I was just going to do that and then share sound and then go back and see if that works for us. But now I've lost my resume share. If I stop sharing the wrong way, sometimes it fails me. All right. I have to reopen the presentation on a different tab. Because it doesn't always follow what I want it to do. So give me 1 second while I figure out my technical difficulties. Okay, and then
Suppose that today you went back to school and took the normal courses of study, math, reading, science, and social studies. But in addition to those courses, there was also a class called Walk. At the end of the grading period, you earned letter grades for your performance in all those courses, and in the class called Walk, which is a course that teaches and assesses walking, you earned a B. How do you feel about this? Some of you are probably thrilled because before this, the highest grade you ever received in any class was a C. Still, others might think something along the lines of, I haven't tripped or fallen in like 4 years. Shouldn't I have an A? What if you earned a B for walking and every other person you know earned Ds? Do you feel better about your score now? Does this make you think that you're even more skilled at walking? What if they all earned A's? Do you feel worse? At this point in the example, you might start thinking to yourself, what does it even mean to earn a B in walking anyway? And if you're asking yourself that question, you're at a point where you can understand why our school district is moving away from a traditional grading system and toward a standards-based system.
I'm going to stop there. Does that sound like a good place to stop? So that's so those aren't like it's just 6 minutes long, and it kind of just gives a really good explanation for how students might process the idea of standards-based grading at 1.
Well, and it's great for it's great for families too, because it's, you know, it carries on with this theme of walking. Like everybody knows what that is, everybody knows how to do that, right? And so they can identify with the purpose of the video, like what the video is trying to explain. And I found it to be clear and interesting to watch. And anyway, my hopes are that my district puts something together like that too, because I think it's great. So thanks for finding that, Andrea.
Yeah, and expect, as you go through and talk to folks about it, expect to spend a few months explaining, because until you get to the part where students are like, how do I fix my grade? And you go over there and you say, well, it looks like you know how to do this and you don't know how to do this. I just need you to show me that you know how to do this one piece for, the car. I just need to know that you've, got your grades to work, your breaks to work, or in the example of the ELA here, I just need to know that you can determine the theme of a story. So tell me how you're going to demonstrate that you can determine the theme of a story, and we can fix that right up. And so it gets you, the conversations you have about learning will help explain what exactly is going on. And what this is doing is feeding into the sort of building a learning culture, which is what you need to do in your school if you want to get more folks on board with the idea. So for setting the stage for it, you'll need to make sure we've got like time and materials for the students to do their learning. It's part of like setting these high expectations and like role model accepting and making mistakes. So that's part of what's going on. And in your classroom, as you role model accepting and sharing your own mistakes in the learning process, it helps students see, oh, making mistakes is part of learning. This person who's teaching us right now made mistakes at some point. So my mistakes aren't a sign that I don't belong here, but they're a sign that, hey, this is part of a learning culture, is making mistakes. And then you give students and help students make their own learning happen, and they start talking to other people about how that opened up the world for them. So this is what you're going to do, is start making a learning classroom in your culture, making the learning culture in your classroom with these sort of ideas, and then that will start to spread to other places and to other parts of your building. Value reasoning over the right answer, and when they're wrong, help students troubleshoot what the problem is instead of telling them the right answer. So these are all part of sort of good teaching. Then you're going to want to make sure you share progress often. Students get motivated and buy into the learning culture as they start seeing that they're starting to do better. So the more often you sort of share progress that they're getting better, even if it's little tiny steps, and they get more bought into it. And as your students get more bought into the learning process, then other people will start to see that. Make learning a community effort with like contests, collaborative learning, rewarding, helping others. So I know that I got a bunch of people to both pass and do better and be motivated to help each other by saying, if you help your tutor, your friend to pass, it will raise your grade as well. So maybe you got, a meets on this, but you can raise it up to and exceeds if you're explaining and talking and helping your friend understand it, because it takes a higher level of mastery to help your friend pass. And then there's people who are motivated to do that, mind it doing that more.
Can I ask a super quick question? And I'm not trying to poke holes. I'm actually curious. So when you're talking about if you tutor a friend to pass, it also raises your grade. How do you collect evidence like that they're actually tutoring them to pass, or just like, oh yeah, I'm gonna retake it anyway, I'm gonna, sure, whatever, I'll just say
I had them do it in my room.
Okay, cool, perfect.
Yeah, they would just come in after school and do it in my room, and I would
sense.
just walk around the room and I eavesdrop.
Chill, perfect.
Yeah,
thanks.
sure. Empathy interviews. So this is part of like, if you want to switch your culture into more of a learning culture that supports standards-based grading, figure out what makes learning fun, what makes them engaged in that process. Tell me about a time that you enjoyed learning, and tell me about some times that you felt overwhelmed, and try to change your class to be more like the times when people enjoyed learning. When I did this in my classroom, people said things like, well, I understood what we were doing then, I don't anymore now. And I was like, oh, well, what did they do to make you understand what it was like? Well, they always had like the stuff put on the board, and they always went through and explained it this way. And so I said, what if we just do that all now? And they're like, wait, you can do that? You can change these things? And suddenly they feel like you're partnering with them, and to make the class better and to make the class more enjoyable. and that then they get more bought into that I should be doing all of these things, and it gets it builds that culture that you need to support the standards-based grading. And then finally, you can kind of start listening to how do we get other people in there? What, like, how do we address parent concerns? How do we address colleague concerns? What aspects do we have control over that we can start working on to build this group of people that want to change how we do learning? Once you've sort of started to build that learning culture, start taking an analysis of what's working. What things did you do that changed the social climate around learning, changed the intellectual climate? Like what made it more rigorous but still possible? What rules and policies do we put in place, and how did each one of these support that learning culture? When you go through and do this analysis, you'll see a lot of places where you did well, and there's a couple places where, oh, I didn't think about another way of working with parents, or, oh, I forgot to put some good rules and policies in place for these situations. So now let's work with the class to build those pieces. So I like this structure because it helps to trigger a bunch of things that I don't naturally think of and fill in gaps for supporting that culture of what I want to do. And then like brainstorm with folks on how do we improve. You say, hey, you can do it with other people in your building who are trying to do standards-based grading or around problems of practice. You can say, hey, I see that there's weaknesses here. You can do that with your students. Hey, I want to make more of a learning culture, and I feel like, where do we feel like the gaps are, and how do we brainstorm and improve them? And you can do that with your school. So all of these are different ways you can kind of build sort of that learning culture that supports the standards-based grading.
So what we're going to do now is transition to our problem of practice breakout room. But really that's, you may have not even taken steps in your team, school, district. So you might not even be able to bring a problem of practice. So first filter I would say is anyone in your breakout room have some steps that they've tried and they want to talk about how it went. And in the event that no one has yet tried, that's okay too. Just think about what's the biggest barrier that you see with taking steps for institutional change. Where do you expect those road bumps to be? And what is an easy entry point? So I called it the path of least resistance. Like, what is a good entry point for beginning this process in your team, building, district, whatever size you want to look at, and what are some, again, roadblocks or barriers that you anticipate, and how would you respond to that? So first filter, invite anyone in the group who has tried some things already and they're bringing their experience to the table to talk about it. And if no one has, maybe focus on these two questions. It's the, go ahead and advance the slide. It's the same groups as last time. I know we had some new folks joining us or some folks that were not on this screen. So again, if you're not here, hang out for a second as we begin to move to breakout rooms, and we'll find a spot for you. Go ahead, next slide. And then one more. Remember, same steps every single time. If you have a presenter who's tried some things and gonna be leading you through, please follow the protocol. But otherwise, if it's just sort of a general discussion because no one has officially tried anything, that's okay too. Clarifying questions before we get started.
Can you go back to the list of breakout rooms, please?
Yes. I'm going to start creating the breakout rooms. We've got.
Oh, I was already.
Oh, you already did? Okay. I'll close it. All right.
I'm just waiting to push the create button.
Remember, if you don't see you, hang out here for a second. We'll find a spot for you. But otherwise, if there's no more questions, maybe we'll open up breakout rooms and you can start assigning yourself. Take yourself to your breakout room by the group number.
Yeah, and if you don't see yourself, then we'll put you in a room that has the fewest number of people, or if you have a person you really want to be with, we can do that as well.
Great. I see some people moving around here. Excellent.
And if you change your mind and you actually do have questions or want to comment on anything, you can hang out for a minute as well. And ask questions. Those are all options.
I'm driving right now, so I can't see if I'm on a list, but I doubt I am since last time was my first meeting. Could you move me to a room, please?
Yes. I'm sorry. Say your name. Say your name one more time. Eric
Mueller.
Arik. Okay.
Yeah,
Arik, thank you. Let's put Arik in room 4. I'll just assign you right now to room 4. Perfect. Who else needs some help here?
Yeah, also me. Елена Герасимова.
Elena. Okay. I'm going to move you to 3. Elena to 3. Thank you. All right. Jessica, do you see you on here?
No, I don't.
Okay. I'm going to move you to 5.
Okay, thank you.
5.
Leah, do
Absolutely.
you remember who you were with last time?
Oh, that's a good question. I can't find the right distance to read this thing. It's so crazy.
Oh, sorry.
Here, hold on. I opened it on my bigger screen, so let me do that. There we go.
If you don't remember, we could just put you with
I
somebody.
don't. Yeah.
Okay. I'll just throw you in a room. Let's see who's got the least number of people. How about room 1?
Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm hanging out because I have a quick question. I see I have an invite to group 1, but I don't, Robin, are you waiting to? Maybe Robin's not there. Hey, it's Sonia and nice to see you guys. I just two quick things. One is I was leaving an interview from work, and so the first 15 minutes I was on Zoom via my phone. And honestly, it was my personal phone. I don't know.
Welcome back. Go back to sharing my screen so that Christy wanted to look at the things. She can talk about that.
Okay, y'all had a lot to write about here. This is great. I love this. So I'm looking at group 1 right now. And I know that when we start the slideshow, it stops showing updates. So I have the real-time slides open on my left, which is why my face is turned to the left. So that's what I'm looking at. I see students not completing practice work to prepare for summative work. One idea, respect student time. Do the practice you need until you understand, and then stop doing the practice after that, right? I love that giving students agency to make decisions for their own learning, right? You do as much as you need to do and then stop, because then it becomes busy work after that. Although the next bullet point, it's hard for young people to always feel, recognizing that students always, recognizing that students don't always recognize that they need more practice. So I would say there's definitely like a metacognitive piece that gets developed over time where they figure out the connection between doing the practice and being successful in class. So, if you start the year with do as much as you need and then stop, I think kids are going to take advantage of that and do none for sure. But I think if you keep circling back to in class, like starting with the practice, let's go over the first 3. Who has questions? Like we're building that into our work each day. Then maybe even students can, I don't know, I'm just making this up right now. Maybe students can use that on the assessment. So if they have it, if they've practiced and they have it done, they can use it, right? There's opportunity costs. You choose not to do it, that's fine. you
want
can
to
choose
add
that.
something in that as
Yeah.
well, Christy.
Yeah.
One time I did it like exit tickets for a little while. I think it was in reactions or whatever. And I put a thing at the bottom of like, we did an exit ticket. They did their answer, and then I had them do a little metacognitive circle, like, and the circling was, I'm ready for a test on this tomorrow. And then I'd say, okay, if I get a bunch of people who are ready for the test, we do the test tomorrow. And then I need more practice on this, or I need more instruction on this. And students were more honest because there was a big, there was more at stake here. If I answer this incorrectly, then the class is going the wrong direction, right? If I say I don't need any more practice and that I'm ready for a test, she's giving us a test. And if I say I need more practice, I got to be here and do the practice, right?
It's like
Or if
each of those choices has some opportunity cost to it, right? Like none of them are free skates. So a group 4 says students trying to game the system, working for points rather than focusing on the learning. That was a huge shift for me, moving from a traditional grading system to a standards basis. There are no more conversations about why did I miss 1 point on this or half a point, or can I do extra credit, or can I have 2 more points on this? Or we just don't have those conversations anymore. It's more about getting out the rubric and looking at the progression of learning and like, how do I need to show this differently so that I can progress in the grade levels or in the category levels, right? So that's a much more productive conversation because it focuses on the learning and not on the, arbitrary points.
And so side note to that, one of the things that I found is like, when they're like, well, I don't understand why they got this grade. I'm like, okay, great. This is what I saw in your work. Can you circle and show me where you explained this part? And then they're like, oh, I didn't. So yeah, that's why I gave you this. I said that you were developing because it was missing this part. Show me where that is and I'll change it.
Group 2 is, I'm just looking, understanding what the grade means. Teachers getting stuck in the way it's always been done, right? And we face that in Beaverton too, for sure. We have sort of our old school set of folks who are like, I've always done it this way my whole career. And when I was in school, we did it this way and I'm comfortable with it. And the parents know what it means and there just aren't any problems. And so trying to shift that mindset, it's hard, for sure. It's a challenge area. And then just keep encouraging and bringing them alongside you, and or just bringing it up around the lunch table. Like, I tried this thing and I love it. And the students really rose to the challenge and did X, Y, and Z, or what, bringing that positive energy to it, I think is key. How do we communicate with parents that we're changing grading and if we need to make adjustments throughout the year? Our slide about communication, I think it is really important. The letter that I attached there, I actually found on Twitter. I don't know if any of you follow Johanna. She was at Pullman as a chemistry teacher. Now she's an NSTA, like a regional coordinator or something like that. And she posts a lot, and she's very much into the ungrading realm, which is a fascinating realm as well. And she'll talk on Twitter just about how much she hates grades and how she did it with her students. And so that's a copy of the letter that she sent home, which I found interesting. But I think communication is key, and always with the mindset or the layer of you are trying something and you are in a do no harm mode, right? Like, you are not trying something at the expense of the students, right? You have their best interests at heart. And one of the things Johanna talks about a lot is grades are a collaboration between her and the students. Like, they're conferencing about it. Let's look at the evidence. Let's moderate together. That takes time. Building that into your course, like I said, it takes time, but it also is I mean, talk about relationship building with your student, right? I mean, that's really key because you are deciding together what you think it should be, and not just like, I wish it was this, so it's going to be this. Like, clearly there's evidence in front of us. Let's get the rubric out so it's right next to us as we go through. And you can build it in, you can do checks along the way so that when you get to the end, it's not like you're looking at mounds of evidence because you've already looked at several checkpoints along the way. But that's one idea. I saw in the chat, someone said, what is ungrading? There's a whole book about it by the author Bloom. It's pronounced Bloom, but she spells it B-L-U-M. B-L-U-M. Highly recommend if you're interested in exploring ungrading, check it out. It's a really de-emphasis on grades in the classroom.
I want to add a comment to that, what you're saying. A teacher at my son's school tried this whole like, hey, let's have a conversation. Tell me what grade you think you deserve based on this criteria. And pretty much almost all the students either gave themselves the same grade that the teacher did, or they were slightly harsher. And I think that when I went to one of Joanna's talks, she said the same thing happened when students were self-grading, and the conversation, they ended up closer to the grade that she gave them because she saw how well they were doing instead of just the parts where they were missing. Sometimes we're harsher on ourselves than we think.
Okay, do you want to, I'm just noticing the time. Do you want to advance the slide?
Yeah, we should.
So we're getting to the point in our series where a lot of the things that we're talking about are hitting all the pillars, which is great because all these things are interconnected. They're all about motivation, resisting bias, and making sure our grades are accurate. So we started early on kind of focusing on one pillar, but as we are talking about more complex things, we're noticing that they're just very interwoven. And with that note, let's talk about some resources. Right, this is you, Andrea. Yeah.
Yeah, so the first book is a guide for administrators. So like if you're talking about the process of changing the culture of a district or a building, this is a really good book to think about, how do I change a whole group of people and work them towards standards-based grading? That's what this first book is. The second book is about the standards-based grading from starting to finish. Like, how do you start the process and how do you get all the way there? And the last resource is, if you're still stuck on where to start and you're like still feeling overwhelmed, because sometimes you can walk away from this and go, all right, I felt like I knew what I was doing when I was in that whole PLC, but now I'm stuck. This is just a fun, easy, quick podcast to listen to on like, this is where you start. So you can maybe listen to it on the way to school and think, today I'm going to do this thing. So that's what these resources are.
The standards-based classroom, the middle book, is, I really like that book a lot. It really walks you through the process of thinking how to get started, thinking about your learning targets, thinking about the aims that you want students to have, like the essential understandings. It just walks you through the entire process as you build that program. It's not a huge book, but it's dense. Like, it's got a lot of good suggestions and information in it. And even if you don't end up going to ultimately to a standards-based model with your district, it's just great reflection for you as a classroom teacher, or I found it to be for me. All right, Andrea, next time.
All right, so next time we're going to meet on June 7th. That's only in a couple weeks. And we're trying to make that so it doesn't hit when people are starting to finish their grading for the year and that before they take off for whatever you're going to do for the summer. The focus is going to be group time for you to plan what you want to do next year. So it's really not us talking. It's more you guys are getting some planning time and then report out your plans so that you can learn from each other for your plans. So there's not going to be, it's mostly going to be breakout room and then you guys report out on your own plans. And then it'll be the same Zoom link, and really just what we want you to do, instead of giving you more books or resources to read, just think about what you want to accomplish for next year so that when you have that planning time, you can make the best use of it with the folks that you can work on problems of practice with. And it looks like Christy put the link to the exit ticket in the chat. So make sure you finish that for today. And then I'm going to stop recording the webinar. Did I actually
then-
stop recording the webinar?
No, the recording is still going. I'll stop it.
I stopped sharing instead of the stopping.